So today I'm talking about social media use in therapy specifically, and how to talk about it with our parents of our clients themselves, and all of the really sticky situations that it can get us into sometimes. It's really hard to kind of have that conversation about what is problematic versus what isn't problematic. And I don't know about you guys, but I have a lot of anxiety about like starting that conversation specifically with parents a lot of the time. So let's talk about it. So what are social media? So according to Merriam-Webster, forms of electronic communication, so websites are social networking, microblogging, basically any place on the internet that we can create online communities, share information, ideas, sort of an information, cultural exchanges, those sorts of things. And over 5 billion people in the world use social media in one way or another. So it's kind of unavoidable. It's an extension of our offline lives, which is the one thing parents hate to hear. Okay, so what about social media is unavoidable? It's the fact that it impacts so much of our lives. Almost every part of our lives gets touched by social media in one way or another. A lot of the time we only think about this last bullet point here, the entertainment aspect of it, right? So we think about the TikTok, we think about YouTube, all of those things. But it's also really important source of food sourcing for some people. So think of our clients with agoraphobia, for example. If we can't make it out to a grocery store, food delivery services, so Instacart, Uber Eats, DoorDash, those sorts of things are very vital to making sure they can sustain their health, as well as like online recipe exchanges, blogs, things like that. If you've ever gone to a new restaurant, I'm sure you've looked up a Google review or two. Those 3 and 5 stars don't come from nowhere, right? There's someone on the other end of that saying, all right, this is a really crappy restaurant. I found 12 rats in my soup, or this is the best food I've ever had in my life. And we learn to trust those things. We learn to trust other people, their input, things like that. As well as health information. Therapy Notes is, believe it or not, a social media site because we're able to exchange information with our clients. We're able to send, receive updates, things like that. Being able to do telehealth is also an exchange of health information, a form of social media, as well as video platforms. I know a lot of us use like YouTube videos or shorts in some of our sessions especially with our younger clients, to be able to explain concepts or like help them see what might be going on with anxiety and worries and things like that. It's also prominently used in our education system. So learning management systems like Canvas, Blackboard, not sure what the younger kiddos use, but especially email, right? So being able to post, answer questions from your teacher, from your classmates, all of those things also go into it. As well as our work. So thinking of LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed, Slack, Teams, Gmail, Paycom. Don't forget to do your trainings, everyone. But all of these things come together to make sure that we're able to do our jobs effectively, able to communicate with the people around us that we need to communicate with, and in order to kind of thrive as a working professional. So thinking of how much you probably, as soon as you signed in today, checked your email, right? Or you checked your to-do list on Therapy Notes. It's kind of ingrained in us to use social media first thing in the morning, last thing at night, in one way or another. Also in building our personal relationships. So keeping up with family who might be on another continent, in another state, in another city. Being able to maintain that daily connection, even though you're not in the same space as them, as well as like casual gaming communities, dating sites, things like that, that really kind of draw you in, make you feel more in a social area of your life, more fulfilled. And then a lot of streaming services also offer social media extensions. So thinking of like Disney Plus, you can watch it with a friend over the internet. So they have a function for like co-watching from a distance, which is really cool. And it definitely came in handy in COVID for a lot of people. So thinking of those different areas as well. All right, so what the heck happens with all of this social media use? So here's some quick stats on social media use. And this study was done in 2018 on a bunch of middle schoolers. And 17% of the students interviewed reported using social media beginning at age 9 or younger. So they're really starting straight out of the gate, being able to do these things, which opens them up to a world of like wonderful potential cultural exchanges and also a world of potential harm, unfortunately, as well. So 40% of those students also accepted friend requests from people they didn't know on the internet, which if we think back to like learning about the internet in childhood, a lot of time it shows like we were taught, oh, don't talk to strangers. No, that's bad. That's wrong. That's not so much the case anymore, right? Because we're living in a social media age where everyone's profiles are easily accessible. Think about TikTok, for example. You post a video, a million people can see it, whether you want to or not, unless you're privating your account, which causes you to go through a lot more steps, which a 12-year-old probably isn't going to do the second they set up a TikTok account. All right. And then 40% also reported their parents didn't monitor their social media use. So that also can come in as kind of a problem, because what we see a lot of the time with social media use is one end of the spectrum or the other. So either parents are kind of being a little loosey-goosey and letting the kids have free reign over social media, or they're like really kind of hunkering down and saying, no, you can't use social media. You can do it for an hour, things like that. So we want to help find a little bit of a middle ground, right? Where it feels balanced. So the child feels like, all right, I have some sort of agency over this part of my life. And also they're able to do it safely. All right. And so a lot of these middle school students reported that they mostly use social media with their friends to share pictures, basically just to stay connected out of school. So at this time, again, the study was in 2018, about 27% of them use Instagram, 25 use Snapchat, and the other 25 YouTube as their most frequently used sites, which again has probably drastically changed since this was a pre-COVID era. All right, so what can influence problematic use of social media? So spoiler alert, it's peer pressure. That is a really big one. So a lot of research suggests that peer influence is one of the primary factors that goes into play. So one study found that levels of position in the social hierarchy. So if the most popular kid in school posts a picture of them like vaping and drinking a beer, that's so cool. Oh my gosh, I want to do that too. But if the least popular kid in school was to post that, then it's like, ugh, that's cringe. Like, I don't think that's interesting at all. And so that was found to be a lot of attitudes towards social media posting specifically. So the higher you are on the social ladder, the more influence you tend to have. Some other areas that influence that problematic use is lack of coping skills, specifically with emotion regulation. A lot of online communities on the internet cater towards kind of validating emotional experiences, which can be really helpful for a lot of our clients, especially those who have maybe some social deficits. So being able to engage with a community that validates their experiences and says, I've experienced these things too, can be really helpful. The flip side is when you're doing it a little too much, right? So you're over consuming content saying, I have depression too, here's what happens when I have depression. And it kind of gets you stuck in that depression or anxiety loop because you're seeing this all the time. You're taking in other people's symptoms. You're kind of living your life through depression or anxiety in that aspect. And then we have Exactly. It really does. It gets a bad rap sometimes because it can be really helpful, right? It can help us to make sure that we're feeling validated and feel like we have a community, especially you see this next bullet point. So a lot of conflict in our lives. So if we feel like our parents aren't listening to us, we're probably going to lean more towards our online communities or our friends, things like that. So being able to have open communication with our young kiddos or our teens about, all right, what is it that is affecting you? Like, what are the areas of conflict that we're having? Being able to talk those things out so that they feel supported offline can definitely increase the or decrease the likelihood of problematic social media use. All right, and then we have, again, social standing. So kind of going back to the peer influence aspect of things, the higher we feel in the social hierarchy or the more supported we feel by our peers, the less social media kind of has that impact of, I want to do what she's doing, or I want to do what he's doing, they're doing, all of those things. Also, a big aspect of this is major life changes or adjustments, especially for our underage clients. So thinking of like divorces, moves, things like that, that can really kind of shake your offline reality. There's a lot more consistency online, right? Because no one can move away online. Everyone is easily accessible. You can reach out to everyone easily, which can cause a lot of using social media more so as a crutch rather than a support. Our goal is to have social media in our offline life to be kind of a symbiotic relationship, right? So one should be helping the other at all times. All right. So some impacts of social media use. So object valuation can change. And one study that was done, which was kind of cool, actually, they found that any social media post that had over like 1,000 or so likes, it kind of highlight a section of your brain that said, okay, this is interesting. I should look more into this. I should look more into this person's background. Like, I want to know more about this human, rather than a social media post that say had like 12 likes. It's just like, all right, I'm just going to scroll past that. It doesn't really even register in your brain a lot of the time. It seems sketchy. It seems unsafe. And so you don't want to engage with it as much. All right, so it can also lead to, again, going back to what we said before, an increase in our depression and anxious symptoms. So being able to overconsume a lot of information regarding our symptoms, regarding how other people manage their symptoms, because there's so much information on the internet and there's so much information being updated moment by moment, second by second. So allowing yourself kind of time to digest what you have seen or what you have already consumed is very valuable. All right, and then impacts on self-esteem. Everyone shows their best side on social media, which is great, being able to brag about your accomplishments. And also the reality of your day-to-day doesn't get seen, right? No one smells your morning breath on social media. No one sees your hair undone. No one sees you without the perfectly styled photo sometimes. So it can weigh a lot on our self-esteem, right? Like, why am I not perfect every day? Why does my breath stink in the morning? Those sorts of things. You can kind of start to nitpick offline what you're not seeing in your online. All right. And then we have a lot of self-diagnosing and diagnosis preoccupation. So I don't know if you guys have seen this a lot, but a lot of the time, specifically with like neurodevelopmental disorders, so ADHD, autism, those sorts of things, they tend to go around a lot more on social media, the symptoms of them. And even sometimes like testing questions for them go around on social media, and people can really identify with a lot of these areas, and specifically with like being able to maintain attention, being able to regulate emotions, not feeling like they really fit in with others, feeling impulsive, things like that. things that for the most part can be part of a lot of different presentations. And for the most part, it's really easy for people to latch on to specific diagnoses, right? Because now I have a community. Now I know that there's people backing me and who understand what I'm going through and want to see what can be helpful in terms of the way they deal with these things, which isn't inherently a negative, right? Because we want people to be able to feel seen and heard and safe expressing themselves and being who they are. It can kind of become a problem whenever that is all that they're focused on, right? We want to be able to validate, normalize their experiences. We don't want people using it kind of like as a crutch to say, oh, well, I have ADHD, that means I can't do my work on time, or things like that. We want it to be more so of a, oh, let me see resources about this thing that I'm dealing with and see if like I can help with any of this. All right. And then we have some risk behaviors associated with social media. So a lot of the time, internet challenges can kind of get in the way of things. So I don't know if anyone was around for the like rando nodding like phenomenon that occurred in like 2020, but a popular app went around social media, specifically on TikTok, and it led to a lot of teens like going to random locations to see like and explore whatever was they were directed towards. This group of teens unfortunately discovered a dead body in a suitcase. A lot of other teens found like really cool like rocks and things, but being able to be exposed to these things, being able to take in all this information, all these really cool things that other people are doing, can put teens in a dangerous environment. And being able to talk through those things and being able to identify, all right, what is helpful, what is unhelpful, and what is dangerous for me.
Is that like an astronaut, like a random knot? Like you're just randomly exploring?
Yeah, so what you would do is like you'd go onto the app and it would send you like a random like coordinates, and you and your friends would just like go explore those coordinates. Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So a lot of people just like went through caves or like went through a bunch of different things. These teens, however, ended up in a true crime documentary. So yes, geocaching also. All right. And then we have illegal acts. So for this one, thinking more so, there was a TikTok challenge that went around about like kids stealing things from their schools or like trashing things at school a few years ago. There was a bunch of other challenges or like things that seemed really interesting to them, like underage drinking, things like that. And also a big part of this is sexting. So think about like the use of Snapchat, for example. You can send pics and they delete, quote unquote, afterwards, which as we know, nothing ever really deletes from the internet. But there was a case study done on one teen who they accidentally sent a bunch of nudes to someone else and they got charged with child pornography distribution. I believe they received about like 72 charges from that. So also making our teens aware that like there are consequences for the way we use social media. It can be legal, it can be social, but there can be consequences for those things. All right, we also have increased self-harm. So again, going back to communities online that can be helpful versus unhelpful. So a lot of the times being kind of stuck in that depressive loop from taking in so much information about what depression is, what it looks like for other people, it can reinforce the situations that we already have, right? So if we are already having some sort of self-harm ideations, all right, consuming other people's ideations also can kind of double or triple down on that for us. And then we have cyber hate, so cyberbullying. If you think of like, for this one, more of the like red pill content where it's just like women suck, things like that, men should be better, all of that sort of stuff, or even like cultural, racial, all of those things go into it as well. All right. So we talked a lot about how unhelpful it can be. It can be really helpful, again, in increasing that sense of community, validating their symptoms, validating their experiences, and really alleviating the loneliness that it can feel, especially if we have more social deficits or anxieties in communicating with others, as well as increase access to health information, specifically with like physical, mental, and sexual health information. There's so many really great physicians and mental health advocates out there who share really helpful information. The flip side of that is that there's a lot of people who aren't professionals who don't share as good information sometimes. And then entertainment. I'm no stranger to just like doom scrolling TikTok for some time. So allowing yourself to have some breaks, allowing yourself to just kind of turn your brain off and enjoy content can also just be really relaxing, helpful. All right. Now, in the case of parents versus social media. All right, so why the heck do so many parents and guardians dislike their child's social media use? All right, so oftentimes another person's internet use can kind of act like a black box, right? Where the child turns on social media, something happens, and then all of a sudden my child is emotionally dysregulated. The parent doesn't know what happened during that time on social media. You can't pinpoint exactly who they were interacting with, what they were doing. Did someone say something? Did they see something they shouldn't have seen? So it's that loss of control of like, I no longer can see exactly what my child is seeing because it's not on the living room TV anymore. It's in their hand in their room and their door's locked. There's also a worry about having less influence on the child's life. So thinking more so about family values, right? A lot of the time, the media that we consume can change the way we see the world, right? So if a parent is seeing, okay, there's a lot of changing happening really quickly. I don't know where they're coming from. I'm confused. I don't know what my child is talking about anymore. And it's hard to communicate. That's going to cause a lot of distress in the parent, especially knowing that this is a person who depends on me to sustain life. I want to make sure that they're doing things in a healthy way, in a responsible way. And then the biggest one is kind of the worry about exposure, overexposure to sensitive content. So being able to kind of have discussions about, okay, approaching the situation with curiosity, right, rather than judgment, because a lot of the time our kids, teens, they can feel really attacked whenever parents talk about social media, because a lot of time for kids, social media is kind of put on a pedestal of like, this is the coolest thing, like you shouldn't be doing anything else with your time. What are you doing if you're not on TikTok? And for parents, they see it more as, all right, there's some dangerous stuff out there. Like kids are in danger every day, every second. You should be watching everything your kid does 24/7. So think about even the sort of media that we've been exposed to in our lives. Like think about like Gossip Girl or or was it Pretty Little Liars, right? So for a kid or a teen, you're just like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. They're solving mysteries and like they're like building relationships. For a teen, it's just like, oh, or no, for an adult, it's just like, oh, my child's in danger. Like that's not responsible. They should be doing X, Y, and Z. There's more of a problem solving mindset that they go into. So being able to ask questions, right? Instead of making judgments straight out of the gate of, all right, what are the parents' goals with reducing their child's social media usage and what are the child's goals with using social media, right? So what is this child using it for? What is the function of all of this? And what does the parent want it to be used for? And is there a middle ground between these two things? Yes.
Shout out to the Overcoming Parental Anxiety book, because that's not, sorry. Was my volume working before?
It cut out for a second.
Okay. Yeah. Like this book was really written for this parent, these parents, all parents, in terms of it's a near impossible parental ask that we're going to be working with parents. We're going to be working with kids and parents and the battles that they're having. And it's one of the toughest areas we're going to have. We actively help families to navigate. And there's, the trying to understand how technology impacts everyone's brain, the kids in terms of how much they want it, the parents in terms of their own stories they tell themselves about how traumatic it's going to be and how terrible, and their desire to control what can't be controlled. So this is some of the most interesting work we do, and probably the hardest work that we do, because we all just have to proceed with so much caution and compassion and understanding. It's so much more complicated than just take away their phones. It's the air we all breathe, and all of the emotions that parents are going to come in with. So when you guys have these cases, which we all will, proceeding with caution, taking your time. There's not like a quick fix for this, but by like actually opening up all the things that Dr. Parker is saying and being curious and being understanding of all these different perspectives will help the parent model that as well. Yeah. So it can be very burnout causing or really energizing, these kind of cases, depending on how you're approaching them. So thank you. This is so great, Dr. Parker.
Thank you. Yeah. And so one key component to this can also be kind of investigating what is the parent social media use looking like? Because one thing kids are really great at is kind of holding up a mirror to their parents. So being able to see, all right, are parents overusing or misusing social media? If so, how? And how much of this is the child seeing, right? So investigating that and seeing, okay, let's find some like root causes here. And the APA actually has some really great resources on this specifically. I have links to some videos in the PowerPoint. But yeah, so just kind of encouraging parents to make all forms of media social, right? So the first time a child hears about the consequences or about anything, kind of providing education about anything social media related, it shouldn't be from them getting cyberbullied. It should be from, all right, you see the show that you're watching, social media is in it, let's talk about it, let's have these conversations, let's start early. All right, some signs that can be helpful to look out for in terms of social media use: increased secrecy. So thinking of hiding their use from friends or family, feeling really defensive about what's actually going on online. And again, the only way you're going to notice this increased secrecy is if you're asking questions in the first place, right? If you're already being curious. Compulsive checking. So frequently checking notifications. I have to see how many likes I get. I have to see who responded to my comment. All of those things, interrupting daily activities, responsibilities. I can't watch TV unless I've checked this. I can't do my homework unless I've checked this. Also, emotional distress or fluctuations prior to or following using social media. So if you're noticing, all right, every day after school, my kid is coming in and saying and feeling really distressed, and then they check their social media and they're even more distressed, or they're coming home fine, they're checking their phone, and all of a sudden everything went to hell. The whole day went out the door. Maybe it's time to question what's happening. Who are they talking to? What are they doing? Also, neglecting real life relationships in favor of social media, which can definitely come into play in terms of like prioritizing online interactions over meeting up with their friends for lunch or like hanging out, playing basketball, those sorts of things. Or if you're noticing that there's a lot of more strains in their offline relationships, but they're perfectly fine with talking online to people. Reducing productivity, so decline in work or school performance due to excessive use of the social media. All right, so how the heck do we use this stuff in treatment and in our day-to-day as therapists? All right, so one of my favorite things to do, especially with my clients who have a hard time talking about their emotions, is encouraging them to like bring in or send in a meme every week of, all right, what came up for you? And so some ones that I got in the past couple of weeks are here. So one of my clients with social anxiety sent in ones like when the teacher asks a question, you know the answer to, but you have social anxiety. And probably my favorite one down here on the far right, I don't know how to deal with serious emotions without turning them into a fucking joke. We're working on emotion regulation there. So being able to express emotions and communicate them in effective ways. And these are clients that I've worked with who definitely they have a hard time opening up. Every time you ask them how they're doing, it's just like, oh, I'm fine, everything's great. And then 15 minutes in, it's just like, and here's the waterfall of things that I've been bottling up all week. So being able to start off the conversation in a lighthearted way, being able to normalize that, yeah, it is really hard to talk about these things in therapy. It can be really kind of disarming for a lot of people. As well as like it serves to validate experiences. So one of my favorite Instagram accounts is My RFID Life. And it's this little girl and her mom, and they talk about her journey trying new foods and dealing with RFID and being confident in the foods that she's trying. And it's so cool and so interesting to see that. And in the comments, you can definitely see a lot of people, adults, kids, who are just like, yeah, this is an experience I had. I didn't even know this was a possibility or a thing that could explain what I've been going through until seeing this little girl trying out her new favorite foods or new disliked foods. So it can be really helpful and kind of eye-opening for those times. As well as it can help us to provide psychoeducation. I don't know about you all, but sometimes I get tired of hearing my own voice. So sometimes it's really helpful in treatment to bring out some interesting content, especially for the kiddos. So I found this one really cool YouTube channel, Dragon D Nursery Rhymes. It talks a lot about like, hey, maybe we should wash our hands. Here's what happens if we don't. Maybe we should put on our seatbelt. Here's what anxiety can look like. Here's why we do things. All right. So if we have kiddos who are doing a lot of or having a hard time following through with these things and not believing parents whenever they say, you could get hurt if you don't have your seatbelt on. Seeing it from a cartoon character or not hearing it directly from an adult can be really helpful sometimes. All right, so it can also be helpful for social interaction. So following pages that encourage exploring the city, exploring their interests can be really helpful and can be really helpful in promoting like self-aware, self-care and mindfulness. So here's some like really cool, interesting like Instagram places you can try out or even refer to clients if they're having a hard time. Getting around the city, if they're new to the city, if they just have a lot of social anxiety in terms of like, where do I even start? These things have been super helpful. So finding activities, finding people, groups, things like that. Group therapy is also a super helpful in terms of maintaining social interaction. A big boom that happened over like COVID lockdown 2020 was the emergence of like online D&D group therapy, specifically for like autism or LGBTQ communities who feel like they don't have anyone to reach out to, right? Or they feel like it's really scary to reach out to people for safety reasons or because they maybe have a difficult time communicating. It can also serve as like a kind of a low pressure communication option to practice the wonderful social skills that their amazing therapists are showing them. So being able to have some sort of anonymity, right? If I say the wrong thing, I know they don't know exactly who I am. So it feels a little bit safer and a little bit lower of a risk for them, as well as kind of gradual exposure in a more controlled environment. So I don't have to go to a bar and talk to a stranger. I can get on Discord and talk to someone. I can send an email. I can message a forum, things like that. All right. So also really important in exploring why someone's using social media. So what is the role of their use? One thing that I found to be really helpful is using the ACT matrix or the joining the dots worksheets. And this is because social media can serve a lot of functions, right? It can help you to avoid unwanted experiences. It can help you to go towards wanted experiences, and trying to figure out what place it has in that person's life and how it could be harming them, how it can be helping them. And also it can be helpful in exploring how else can we get these needs met. If this is really helpful, great. We don't want it to be the only coping strategy. So what else can feel similar to this? All right, and some things to consider when we're exploring use. So their manner of use. So the people who are posting versus the people who are just kind of watching from the shadows. So the posters versus the lurkers. Examining their frequency, their intensity of use, what time of day they're using it. And my favorite thing to use for this are kind of mood charts, especially if they're noticing mood fluctuations. All right. And then figuring out what they're using. So what sub-communities of TikTok or Reddit are they on, and exploring what connections are they making with other people, and sometimes even exploring, okay, are you meeting these people offline as well, can be really helpful. All right, and also exploring what aspects of social media are evoking emotions with them. So is posting causing them stress? Is seeing someone else's posts specifically causing them stress? What parts of it are exciting to them? What parts are they really kind of feeding off of? And again, going back to the previous slide, how can we cultivate that in other areas of our life? And then most importantly, what are we learning from social media? What is our takeaway at the end of the day? How do we feel like we're growing? And how do we feel like we can grow more? All right. And then that's all I have for you guys. So thank you for hearing me yap today.